So if we want to assess the residuals of a regression and we want to know whether or not they're normally distributed, we're going to first run that regression. So when we run our regression, we go data, data analysis, and we select our regression there. In this situation, I'm just going to do a simple regression where I'm going to use for my y variable this verbal score, and for the x variable, in this case, just that math score. It doesn't really matter which one you do, but we want to make sure we do is that we check off that we want residuals, okay? And so when we have these residuals, when we run it, you're going to get your standard regression output here, where we can see that we have our actual equation that's going on here. So this would have been told us that y, which is our verbal score, is equal to 176.05 plus 0.564 times that x, which represents the math score. And what happened was, for each and every one, if you look back at that normal data, right, for each and every verbal score, there's a math score. And what we did is we're going to take that math score as an x and predict the verbal score. So that output, what we have here is that we have for each observation, for each row of our data, what our model would have predicted, what that equation of 176.05 plus 0.564 times that math would have predicted. And it's going to be off from what the actual data is. So for that very first data set, it would have predicted 565. But if we look at the data, the verbal score was actually 510. And so it's saying, hey, we were off by 55.33. And so with those residuals, there are residuals, but there are then the standard residuals, okay? That's funny that it does that. And so those standard residuals are just basically the residuals, but turned into Z values. And the nice thing about the standard residuals is that we hopefully remember that for Z values, that Z values are centered at 0, and that for the most part, they're going to range from -3 to +3, that whole plus or minus 3 standard deviations, which means for the bins, because for a or to know if this is normally distributed or not, we are going to build a histogram. And in order to actually build that histogram, we need the bins. And so for those bins, we're going to use -3 all the way up to 3. And we can build that histogram. So for that histogram, we're going to go back into data analysis. You're going to select your histogram option. And for the input range, you're going to select your standard residuals. And for that bin range, we're going to select those bins that we typed in. So just like any histogram, you have to write down the bins. I've given both of these things titles. We've got the standard residual title and the bins title, so I can select labels there. And you want to make sure that you select chart output, otherwise you won't get that picture. And so what we get here is our histogram. So most common, they ask you to compare your histogram to a histogram that they have, and it's a true-false type question. But what we're looking for here, though, is this idea that it's normally distributed. Oh, that was a pretty bad normal curve there. So that's this hey, it's symmetrical type thing. And so in this case, we'd probably be like, yes, this is normally distributed. They're not all going to be normally distributed. We ran another analysis on annual sales where we got that regression output with all of the different input factors there. And if you ran this with standard residuals, we can also create our bins here. So again, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, oops. 1, 2, 3. And then again, data analysis. And if we build our histogram, we've got slightly different positioning here. Have to redo that. And our bin range there. I've got my chart output. I still have labels, and I'm going to hit OK. And if I look at this histogram, we would say that this is probably not normally distributed, that it's got that skew there. This is a skew to the right. or we also can call this a positive skew. But either way, this is not really normally distributed. And so remember, when we're building a regression, in order for our answer to be a good answer, we want those residuals to be normally distributed. Not something that we have to worry about too much in COM 162, with the exception of sometimes they ask us to build the histogram and compare to their histogram. That's no problem. We just have to keep in mind that we want to be using those standard residuals and that we need to create our own bins and type those in.